Welcome to the Alchemy of Success podcast with Dr. Michael Leslie, PhD, designed to inspire, educate, and empower listeners to embrace a life of abundance in all areas: mind, body, spirit, relationships, and finances. Let's get started.
Good evening, everyone from the East Coast, and more specifically from Cartagena, Colombia. Welcome to our third episode of The Alchemy of Success: how to get what you really want out of life in all the areas that are important to us. And those would be health, happiness, full self expression, and vitality, which is so important nowadays in order to do what we want to do. I'm pleased to have our special guest tonight, Bob Mueller, former executive with the Vanto Group, and who has done a number of outstanding things in his life and made an extraordinary contribution to corporations and individuals. But you can hear more about him in the commercial that's going to follow.
Bob Mueller is a master in organization strategy, implementation, design, and leadership development, as well as overall human and spiritual development. He has a 50-year history in senior management and leadership positions in multiple industries, creating higher performance and aligned cultures and realizing breakthrough business results. He led the transformation of leadership, culture, and performance throughout Magma Copper Company, which realized a 700% increase in share price. He currently mentors over 30 executives, CEOs, presidents, and founders, and professors in for-profit and non-profit enterprises and academic institutions.
Again, thank you, Bob, for being with us tonight.
You're welcome, Michael.
Now, I know you've been on the road recently, and why don't we can start off, you can tell us where you've been and what you've been doing for the last few weeks.
Well, I have been in Oregon. I went on vacation for a couple weeks, but I'm about to leave on a 2-month trip. And I'm going first to Tucson to visit my grandchildren, my son in Tucson, and there's a professional golf tournament there that my son, the private club he belongs to, is managing. And then I'm going to India for a wedding, and then I end up in South Africa with a nonprofit that I mentored there, and then I end up in England with someone I mentor there. So it's many travels over the next several months.
Well, this is fabulous. It's kind of true to Bob. Always a world traveler, always engaged in helping other people develop themselves and their businesses, and also at the same time enjoying your life. So that's what I've always loved about you. That's what I've always valued about you, this ability to combine both personal development with professional development with, I would call, a lifestyle that allows one to enjoy this wonderful experience that we call living. So, with that said, as an introduction, Bob, I really wanted to really get closer to knowing you tonight. We've been, as I was saying earlier in the evening,
Sure.
I've known you for over 20 years. And when you were, as you've coached me and mentored me in my own growth, and I wanted to start off perhaps by you talking about what were the elements that contributed to your development. What is it like? Give us some insight into how you came to be the person that you are in business and in life.
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Michael. That's a good question. First of all, my first career was with the Ford Motor Company, and I was a manager of the employee involvement and participative management group there. And that definitely contributed. I met Dr. Richard Pascal, who was at Stanford at the time, at that juncture. And Richard was, I think he's at Oxford these days, but he he knew Jack Welch and he worked with Ford. And he wrote about a number of the things we did at Ford in turning around Ford and creating a company that people were engaged in and could build cars in new ways. So that was my first career. Then I left there and I went into consulting. I opened an office for a company called King Chapman Broussard. This was all in the Detroit area. And I spent a number of years there. Um, and then I was hired by Magma Copper Company, which Jason mentioned. We created 700% additional shareholder value, but most importantly, we transformed the culture to a high performance culture where people had an opportunity to make a difference, and that included Peru. We had purchased a mine in Peru called Tintaya, and then from Magma, I ended up working for Vanto Group and Landmark Education Business Development, and created a global consultancy, as you've mentioned. And that's where I think, Michael, you and I kind of met at that juncture. The one thing I would say about myself, I think I have more the perspective of an executive as it relates to change efforts. And what I mean by that, it's the financial performance end of it, it's the culture end of it, it's the financial end of it, all those. So I think my perspective that although I've been in consulting and Fortune 500 global companies, I have an executive perspective.
Good. Well, good. Let's pick that apart a little bit, if you would. Let's go into it a little
Sure.
deeper. So, I'm very interested in what constitutes or executive perspective, right? That's I think that would be very helpful to distinguish that from maybe an employee perspective or a entrepreneur's perspective, or there are many ways in which people approach their businesses in their life. So talk to us about that, and if you could make a note of this, so I'll make a note of it in case you don't. Then we could talk about what is the significance of creating a transformative or a transformational culture or a transformed culture within an enterprise. So let's start off with those two. What's an executive perspective?
Yeah, Michael, I think the best way for me to look at that is I was the vice president of internal development of the Magma Copper Company. And I reported directly to the chief executive officer, and I was on the executive committee. So that's part of it. Part of it, I think, is I was responsible for the strategy to transform the company and increase value, its value. And I think that's part of being executive, and part of it is working closely with the chief strategic officer of Magma Copper, who went on to take another role at the Broken Hill Proprietary Company. He and I really teamed up on creating strategy and the implementation of a new culture for the company. So that's the executive perspective, and I probably had some of that coming from Ford Motor Company, the perspective I had gained there.
So
So
what I'm hearing is the executive perspective is about a strategy, developing strategy, and also about increasing the worth, if you would, of a company. Are those the two things that an executive is actually focused on primarily?
I think so, Michael, but I would say it includes implementation. So I worked with every one of the division managers who were vice presidents at Magma, and it includes, in addition to strategy and finance value, it includes implementation, which is the actual follow through of the strategy. That's how we achieve the 700%.
Great. So that's the second part of the question I wanted to ask you about. So, and people often, I hear that more often where companies fail is that they do have a plan or they have a strategy, but the implementation is where things go awry, right? Everything's fine when you're thinking about doing it
Right.
and planning it, but then when you try to make it happen, that's where the rubber meets the road, as they would say. So, tell me about how it is that you're consulting made a difference in the effectiveness of the implementation of the corporate or the executive strategies? What was the key there?
Well, I think the key was there were 5,000 people at Magma Copper. And the key was getting all of those 5,000 engaged in the implementation. Like they had actions and they had commitments to implement the culture, the performance, etc. So it was engaging the 5,000 people, I think, Michael, and that I'm writing several books now. One of them is about co-creating high performance cultures. And I think that's a key one, a key something that you engage the entire population of the company in implementing a new culture.
Well, this is good, Bob. So, whether you have I assert that whether you have a small company or a large company, 5,000 or 10 people working for you, there's something about having alignment, everyone in the group on the same page, so to speak, so that we're moving in one direction. So that seems to be something that's not an easy thing to accomplish. If you could share with us, what is it that brings people into alignment in an organization from your experience? What does it take?
Well, I'll give an example at Tintaya, Peru. So it's in the high Andes, this mine. And an example of how to get people engaged was to have town hall meetings. So we not only had employees there, but we invited the wives, the children, and the cats and dogs. And they could ask any question they wanted to. And that was a way of engaging. In that case, I think it was about 1,000 people, Michael. But that's a good example of what I mean by engagement.
Thank you. So you're there's something about having everyone involved. I got that part. Maybe people who would normally not think of involving in an business alignment process, which seems to be pointing to something that is, at least at this point in our conversation, intangible. So, why would you say, for example, why would you say no? We need to bring in not just the people who are in leadership positions in the company into alignment, but we also have to bring their families and perhaps and maybe people that in the neighborhood who are not actually part of the company, but they have to be part of this process. What is it that makes it so important to that everyone be included and no one left out of this change or transformation process for an industry?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Michael. I would assert that I learned that at Ford Motor Company. We engaged 20,000 people in a change effort there. Wasn't just the managers or just the executives. It was the people who were design engineers, development engineers, etc. And so that's one of the things that's carried through with me from position to position, including consulting, is the importance of including the worker and unions even in the process, and that has been a hallmark of my work.
Great. So now, speak to us about this process, and I'm really interested in having this be useful to people, Bob, to people who perhaps haven't worked on the scale, corporate scale that you've worked, but to bring it down to the level of people who might have most have smaller companies. Perhaps there have,
Mhm.
in fact, I would think they, in my experience, some of them at this stage in the game, they have virtual partners who are contributing with them. They outsource a lot of their work. I know that some of my colleagues that I've talked to in various contexts talk to me about how they don't really have meetings together at all. That it's something that they're doing online with people that maybe they haven't really ever met physically. So, what my question about this is, uh, what is it that someone who has a small enterprise would need to be conscious of or aware of to make sure that they're bringing into alignment everyone that's in the process of the business that they're creating? What is it that they might overlook, if you would, that would impair their ability to have their business be successful?
Well, there's a very good question, Michael. I would say a couple things. One company I worked with was in the fashion industry. So, very different than mining and other places I've worked. And they were a small company. I think they had 10 part time people when they started. And I would assert that it's very important to get people together. And we did, in that case, got the 10 people together and they created a future together, a vision of what they saw the company as being. They created values together, and that's very important. And then they created a plan of how they would get from where they were to what the possibility was of the future or the vision that they've created. And initially, that was to be a $10 million company. After about 4 years working with them, they were a $25 million company. So that's an example. But I think what in response to your question, I would assert that it is getting people involved, getting all people involved face to face. I remember the first meeting of that team. It was in a hotel room in New York City, and all 10 people that were part time at that time came together. So anyway, uh, that's in response to that question.
Yeah. So this is also helpful. So in our time, the time that we're living, most likely a company would be able to get everyone together in some online uh, context situation, on Zoom or something like that, so everyone could actually meet everyone face to face. That's actually possible to do. And then the part where you spoke about having people create the future together, um, maybe you could speak more to what that actually looks like. And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question. And I'm saying I'll say it for our listeners also, our viewers. Futures usually or normally exist in perhaps the mind of the company owner, may exist in the mind of perhaps someone who is financing that company. They probably have a future, pretty much that they're both agreed on. But I'm not sure that futures exist for other people that are normally members of the enterprise. They might consider themselves to be contributors, maybe just an employee who's getting a paycheck. They might consider themselves to be even not part of the future, for that matter, right, of the corporation. Maybe they
Yeah,
think they're
right.
there for. Okay, so that's hence the question. So how do you create a shared future for a group of people, or how do a group of people create a shared future for themselves so that they feel that what they're working towards is theirs rather than someone else's, and they're just a part of it?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Michael. And my response to it, and I was thinking of a solar energy company that I worked with that was a startup. And first of all, I think, you have to have people write something down so that they own this future. And they put whatever they put down. Maybe they put down values. Maybe they put down a vision of what they see the company being. But I assert the engagement comes from people participating and owning this future or this vision. And part of that, Michael, is writing it down, actually viscerally writing it down. Declaring it is another way of saying it. So, but I think they actually, and this I discovered at Ford back in the 1970s and early 80s, is people actually wrote down visions, and they wrote down the mission of the company. And so I think the only way you can create that I've seen is get them to have them participate. And by the way, one thing about your question, I know it can be done. I've done it before over Zoom. So I think you can, I mean, ideally, you have people in person. That makes a difference. But I think you can have some people of the team on Zoom also. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, it does. And when they're writing down, say, let's let let's leave behind the question of whether they're in person or they're on Zoom, but they're at least
Yeah.
face to face. Let me put it that way. And you can hear each other talk, and people can say whatever they need to say. So what I'm interpreting you, or what I hear you saying, is that each person who's in the meeting, if you would, or on the team, has makes a statement in writing, and maybe even verbally if you're on Zoom,
Yep.
about what they see or what they consider to be the future of the company, and perhaps what they see for themselves in being a member of that company or a part of that company. I mean, I'm going to ask you to walk us down to pretty much the nitty gritty of it. So we're online together. We're creating our future. So what are we actually doing in the creation of that future for our company?
Yeah, very good question, Michael. And let me look more at what it looks like very
Yes.
specifically.
Yes.
And what it looks like is people contributing to values, to the mission. It could be any of these. We would ask that question, and what it would look like is they'd either write it down or they'd speak it verbally. And then we would, as facilitators, one of my roles would be to help write that down, to begin to write it down, what the values are, what the vision is, what the future is, including what dollar amounts that would translate into, or what volumes. So what it looks like is not only writing down the vision, but how we would know that the vision happened. How would we know that, in the case of the high fashion company, how much apparel, what number of revenue would we have that would tell us that? Or how many, in this case, it was a company that manufactured high end jeans. How many sales would they have? Would they have 100,000? Would they have 200,000? Whatever. So you have to get down to a very close view of what it looks like and it could include though vision, it could include numbers, it could include number of items of sales, like that.
Good, very good. Now, so we've got a clear picture of what it looks like to participate in the creation of a future, and perhaps even of the values that the company is going to have. And you mentioned two words there that get thrown around a lot that I want you to clarify for us: mission and vision. So, what's the distinction between those two when we're talking about creating an enterprise?
Yeah, well, I would assert, Michael, that vision is akin to future. Okay, mission is kind of what would it be? What would a milestone be in the vision? So that would be the mission. The vision would be akin to the future. It's another way of saying future, right?
Yes.
And it would have something attached to it, like a measurement. Like in the case of Ford, it was to have a successful launch of the Taurus car line. That was what they were launching back in the day when it first happened. And so a successful launch would mean it came in on time, it was on weight, it was at cost. There's a number of clarifying statements that go along with successful launch. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And within that same example, Bob, where would the mission be?
The mission, well, let me show it to you. Actually, I'll get it. I'm going to get This is the mission and the vision of the Ford Motor Company that group did. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah. Yes. No, I can't. I
Uh,
can't read it, but you'll have to tell me the question
well,
I'm asking.
here is the mission. That it says Ford Motor Company is a worldwide leader in automotive and automotive related products and services, as well as in newer industries such as aerospace, communications, etc. Our mission is to improve continually our practices, our products, our services, and meet our customers' needs, allowing us to prosper as a business and to provide a reasonable return for our stakeholders. That's our shareholders. Okay.
Okay, good. Well, that's great. So now I think I'm getting some clarity that
Yep.
perhaps for some of us, for some people, mission might be akin to the actions that we're going to take that will bring about the fulfillment of the vision.
That's great, Michael. That's a powerful way to think about it, and as actions, right? What you're saying.
Actions and perhaps accomplishments that will lead towards the fulfillment of the vision.
Right, right. No, that's very good. And I I can't say this enough that it's about getting everyone to participate in that create like this here. There were 50 executives that we brought together that participated in the writing of this, the final draft of it.
Mm,
And each one had some contribution to it. They might have had, I didn't read them here, but they might have had values. These were the values of the
mhm,
company.
mhm.
These were the guiding principles of the company. So, what I'm asserting, Michael, is that people, the way you get alignment is to have people participate together in creating this kind of direction. Then,
Great. Oh, go ahead.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, what I was going to say, the implementation part then is people participating and making it happen, taking the actions, bringing it down to the division level. Like, what do they have to achieve to do that? and they've got to bring it. Then that's also the ownership comes from participation. Yeah.
So, okay, great. So here we are. So we've got people now, they've participated in the process of creating the vision and the mission, and they're in alignment from the values that they actually have. They've generated all this from their values. So now we have people who are in alignment about those two things, vision and mission. We come to now to the point where for implementation, coming back to implementation again, people have to do those things, as I understand it, and that are in alignment with the mission and the vision that they've created together. So then we have what technically sometimes we would call breakdowns, right? Something, okay, we're about to do this great thing, and we're not doing it for some reason, or we're not doing it the way we said we were going to do it, or we didn't even get the close even to, or we're not getting close to the milestones, the outcomes that we visioned together that we would achieve. So and there's various factors that probably contribute to that breakdown. Talk to us a little bit about what contributes to a breakdown, and then how your approach in your consulting and in your work to overcoming those breakdowns so that people can return to full alignment and with the mission and the vision.
Well, here, great question, Michael. Let me take an example of what it looks like in a company. Now, I'm going to take an example of a copper company. That's the one that comes to mind. So there's the mining of the rock. Okay, that's the beginning of the process. So there's so many pounds that would need to be produced that would go into the milling process. That's where you crush the ore and you get a mix of copper. Then it goes to a smelting process. So, in using that as an example, the people in the implementation are challenged by, okay, so in the mine, the breakdown was, as per your question, that they weren't producing as many ounces as the mill, or pounds that the mill could crush. So the breakdown was in they had to produce an expanded number. So they included that, Michael, in a breakdown, and they came up with a solution to producing more ore that they could send to the mill. So that, I think that's, I assert that's in keeping with your question about rather than, another way to say it is, rather than look at breakdowns as stops, they aren't stops. You just include them in what it's going to require to get to the next level. And that would be a breakdown. So is that useful?
Yes. So, and who's responsible for? I intuit. I might intuit that I have already the answer to that question, but you're the guest tonight, and so I want to make sure that we get your perspective on this. So, who's responsible when there is a breakdown for identifying that there is a breakdown, and then making sure that it's fixed? Because I think often. What happens in an enterprise is it doesn't go, and then people sort of drift away, or they what else do they blame someone else? That's usually the case. It wasn't me, it's not my fault that this person or that person didn't do what they said they were going to do. And
Yep.
so who's responsible for keeping the enterprise on track towards fulfilling on its vision?
Yeah, I would. Well, a couple things I would say, Michael, using the example of the copper company. So, who was responsible was a team leader, but it was a team that was accountable for producing more ore? So who's accountable as a team leader? But I think more as importantly is it's owned by a team of people. It's not just a single individual, although there is a person that has to report on what what is the fix, or what is the solution to that breakdown. So there is a person accountable to report. However, there's a team, and that's where the ownership comes in, Michael, that really takes accountability for it.
So we might assert that in a smaller enterprise, say 10 people, something like that, that there would it be everyone. And we're talking about ownership, right? So it could be everyone in the enterprise is takes ownership when something it's turning out. It could be that, but and more likely it's the again there's this thrownness, this expectation that the boss, right, or the CEO or somebody is going to take care of it. So and again, that's where most enterprises don't quite work, I assert. So in a smaller enterprise, who would be the person that has to be responsible, not is like that's her job, but has to be responsible for making sure that the outcome is achieved?
Yeah, I would. Great question, Michael. And here's what I would assert. I'm taking now a company that's a smaller company, and one way they dealt with this breakdown was every Friday they would have a meeting of all hands, and the person responsible for manufacturing would be accountable for dealing with any breakdowns in manufacturing. The person accountable for sales would be accountable. So now, who held them accountable was the CEO. The chief executive was part of this meeting every Friday, and it was a group of about 10 people, Michael. So it's a small, as you asserted, a small company. It's not the thousands of people that the copper company had in it, but it's a smaller enterprise. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the CEO in that scenario is holding everyone in the company accountable. That's what I've heard so far, and that there's the other part of this is that there's a regular meeting in which people account for their what they're accountable for, right? And so
Yeah,
everyone's up to date.
absolutely.
Okay, everyone's up to date. Very good. Um,
Yeah.
let's go back. Let's go to that second question then. If we thank you, Bob, for taking the
Yeah.
time to
Sure.
explicate this. So let's go to the second question, and that's about the cultural transformation. I think people don't really understand what that means to transform a culture. So maybe the what we could take. Let's take this apart, if you would, and put it back together. What constitutes a corporate culture, and why would we need to, or why would we need to transform that culture if we wanted to accomplish great things or have breakthroughs? What necessitates that transformation? So, first question: what is the culture? Second, why do we need cultural transformation?
Yeah. Well, here, Michael, I think you've answered the question, but I'll point to some things. So, number one about a transformed culture is that people own the vision, the mission, the future, the values. Okay. Number two, they see themselves as accountable for achieving that. Number three, I would say that they're passionate. There's something about, and I'm gonna, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that your work is about the human spirit. So you're engaging people so that they actually feel like they're part of the company, they're accountable for the company, and they're passionate about the achievement of the goals of the company.
Well,
That
that all that's clear. Thank you, and I think we're on the same page there. The part that I think my inquiry is about is the I suppose it has to do more with the passion piece of this. So I
yep,
got it that you if your values are included, well, you'll probably be passionate about seeing your values realized. I got it that if the mission and the vision are in alignment with your values, you might be pretty excited about that too. I've got it that I've understood that when something doesn't go the way it's was intended to go, that if everyone's owning that it's supposed to get there, then people will say, well, or they'll raise their hand and say, hey, we're not getting there. And if they have a regular opportunity to meet and examine where they are, that would really kind of keep things on track. So I got all of that part. And the part about if there is a breakdown, then it's like that's part of you include breakdowns as a part of the process of getting to where you want to go. It's not like something bad happen. It's like breakdowns happen on the way to getting where you want to go,
yep,
right? So we got all that out of the way. That's great. So, but the part that that I'm inquiring about has to do with and I'm struggling a little bit here, but give me a second here.
no, go
It
ahead.
yeah, uh, it has to do with uh, the place where people fail, the place where things don't or not or we thought we were in alignment, but we're not. That's the part that I think I'm struggling a little bit with. An enterprise that makes a declaration that we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then we're not doing that. Maybe even the passion and enthusiasm have ebbed away. How do you recapture that? How do you put that back in? The juice. That's it. How do you get the juice back in something
Yeah.
that's really had a lot of excitement around it when it was initiated, but now it's kind of floundering? That's the question.
Okay, so Michael, can I use an example here?
Of course.
Yeah. So today I spoke with a union leader from the Magma Copper Company. I met him in 1989. He led the transformation of his plant at Magma, and he led it in the face of resistance. What you pointed at, they not everybody agreed. Sometimes the linemen fell apart. He persevered in his leadership to have it happen. And he contributed something like, I think it was $5 million of profit a year just out of him being the leader. Now, I assert there's something really important here that he did. He enrolled his supervisor, he enrolled his manager, and he aligned them, and they had doubts. They had doubts, and there were missings, which you're pointing to. I mean, maybe the passion wavered. He continued to be that passion. So my response is using that example, he was the leader of turning that plant around. He was the leader of keeping the vision alive, keeping the passion alive, keeping what people had said in front of them to accomplish. Go ahead.
So it seems we have something that seems to be returning in some of the conversations I have with people who are up to something, right? Something that
Right?
they want to accomplish, and I talk about it in my work as having a burning desire, right?
Yep, that's good.
Something that's maybe it's something very close to your heart. Could be like a dream that you want to see realized. It could be maybe a dream that the community that you're a part of wants to see realized, right? And that you, because you're well, you've taken a stand for that community, and maybe even you've taken a stand for your own dream. You're going to make sure you're going to stick with it. You're going to be unstoppable in having this thing come about, having it realized. So when I, as I say this, Bob, I'm listening to myself speak, and it's there's something there about it goes beyond it's commitment. I think it's something like commitment
Yeah,
to
yeah, it's right,
yeah,
right, Michael. Very good. Thank you for
yeah,
this.
yeah.
This is a great question, and I would assert we're trying to quantify an intangible.
Hmm.
It's something very, now you can say a burning desire. Can I give you an example? One of the professors I worked with, he gave me an article one time. The article was titled Soul of Fire. Soul, Soul, of fire. That sounds to me close to a burning desire. And it's very hard to get at this, but the access to it, I assert, is participation and people owning whether we call it the vision, the future, the mission, the values, and the outcomes that measure those.
Soul, the soul of the fire,
Soul of Fire, right? That was the
soul
article.
of fire.
This was a professor I worked with. He was from Norway,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's very close to what you're saying, Michael. I assert a burning desire.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's the under. I liked what you've just contributed, Bob, because there's something that keeps the fire burning.
Yeah,
That's yeah,
right.
and I, I I- I'd like to I'd like to be closer to distinguishing that.
Yeah,
It's when you get tired, for example, or you don't want to do it anymore, or people tell you it's not going to work, or
right.
any number of things, right? So you got a fire, you started a fire, and what keeps the fire burning, what keeps it alive, even when it's doused, if you would, if it's almost put out, it's the phoenix rising from its ashes, sort of is the
Yeah, that was
analogy
one of
I
the
think.
articles. That was one of the articles, Michael. But
Hmm.
anyway, good question. Perfect question.
Yeah,
Mike,
like,
can I give you another
yes,
example?
yes, I love it if you do that. Yes, go ahead.
Has anybody here heard of Winston Churchill? He was a
Well,
white guy,
yeah, I've heard of him.
and he gave a commencement speech. I'm not sure which university, Michael. I think it was Harvard. And he walked up, he was an old man now, and he walked up to the podium and he said three words: never give up, never give up, never give up. And then he walked back to his seat. And that was his advice to the graduates of the university, is never give up. Now, if you read about Winston, he was in public positions for about 60 years. I may be wrong. Maybe it was 55. If you read about him, he was disgraced numbers of times, including he was not elected to be the prime minister after the war. I think you can check this out. However, his words of wisdom were never give up, never give up.
Love it.
Okay, good.
We've been talking to Bob Mueller, uh, master in organizational strategy, implementation, design, and leadership development, as well as overall human and spiritual development. And I'd like to take the next 10 minutes or less. We have about 10 minutes to to have you speak about the spiritual piece of this. I know that's been of importance to you,
Yeah.
especially in the last years that I've known you. We've talked about your spiritual path, and maybe you could talk to us about how your spiritual path has dovetailed with, or enlightened, or strengthened, or renewed your own quest to be the outstanding strategist and consulting uh, guru that you are.
Yeah. Michael, can I use an example
Oh,
again?
always.
Okay, good. Well, so yesterday I was mentoring a psychologist, and she said a couple things about me. She said, "You're always curious, Bob, about everything." So that's one. She said, "You're always about growth and development, learning. You're always learning." And I think that's, in response to your question, Michael, I think that's critical. And then thirdly, she said, "You're about making a difference in either a local community or the world." And she said, you know what she told me? I'll tell you what she told me. She said, "I wish my mother and father were like that." So I don't have any, I mean, my assertion is that she nailed that spiritual aspect, which is you're learning constantly, you're up to making a difference, and you're curious about everything.
You know, when I listen to you say these things, I can't help but feel the resonance with in my own life, because I've always been very, very curious about a lot of things, some of which
Good.
have gotten me into trouble, right? But I still remain curious
Me
despite
too. Me too. Me too, Michael. I think this ongoing, or if you want to call it continuous learning, is that's a part of it. You make mistakes. Make corrections. Anyway, yep.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes people are uh, not are afraid of taking big risks because they are afraid of making mistakes. And I've come to understand that making mistakes, if you're not making any, first off, you're not learning anything new. And then, second, that making mistakes, quote unquote, is part of the process of getting to where you want to go. It's like, oh, not this way, it's to the right or it's to the left slightly. It's fine tuning your aim, right? And also discovering what other additional resources you might need to get where you want to go, and also who you might need to bring into your project or your game so you can get there. So it's not there's I think the whole mystique about failing and fear of failing is misplaced, because there's no such thing. It's just a learning. We're all in this learning process, and if we see it that way, then I think we'll move much faster towards where we want to go, because we won't be holding ourselves back from doing, quote unquote, the wrong thing, right, on our way to getting to the right thing. So I really appreciate your saying that.
That's
Okay.
great, Michael. Can I answer a question you didn't ask?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the question, and you answered it, but I'll underline it again. Is that this takes courage. This demands risk. This means you might fail, or at least you won't achieve your expectation. That's another way to define breakdown. And yet, that's the never give up part of it, the burning desire that, you persist through this. But it takes, and I don't know how to say it any other way. It takes courage. I mean, you asked about the spiritual development. I would say it takes a lot of courage to do that. I mean, I've done things in South America and Ecuador and places where I thought I was going to die. But you got to be willing to confront that in yourself, I would assert, if you're on this path. That's all I have to say. Yeah. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, it's not what another way to say it, Michael, is that being this kind of person and whoever the audience is here, it's not for the faint at heart. This requires the development of a burning desire. I like that word, by the way, and I think it. I like your title here, "Alchemy of Success." Alchemy, I think, is a bit of magic. So you got to be a soul of fire, or have a burning desire, or be unstoppable to, create this alchemy. Anyway.
yeah, we uh, I sometimes think that people think, and I'm a people person, so I'm one of those, that there's some silver bullet, right? To that's going to get you wherever you want to go, and that if you get that one thing, then you'll have it made, right? Like that. And it turns out that uh, it's not that simple. It's you know it's neither simple and it's not easy and it's not simple. It's neither one of those, and it's possible. You see, that's the thing. And if you stick with it, and if you're willing to, as you said, if you have the courage to stick with it, I think I like that.
Yeah.
That'll be my takeaway tonight. Not just sticking with it, but having the courage to stick with it. Then it kind of works out. It kind of does work out.
Yeah, this is very good, Michael. Can I use
Yes,
another example?
yes.
So one of the chief executives I worked with, okay, he kept asking me, he said, "Hey, can't we reduce this to a formula?" He was an engineer. So you got to he wanted to get it into a formula or a silver bullet. I remember there was another man I worked with. He kept saying, "What? Give me the silver bullet." And I said, "There isn't any." You know what he told me about a year later? He
Mm,
said, "How do we accelerate the magic?"
mm, mm,
So,
mm,
but he'd
mm,
given up on the
mm,
formula.
mm.
There was no form. I mean, or
Yeah.
a formula was a reduced way of talking about it.
Yep.
But and that's not to say there aren't steps. We've
Mm-hmm.
covered some of them here.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered vision, values, mission, futures. So there are steps, and there is engagement and ownership and alignment and all the other things we've chatted about in this hour. But it's not reducible to that alone.
Yeah. I love it that we're concluding today, Bob, with the idea that there's magic. Part of it is actually
I thought
magic.
you'd like that. I like that. I thought you'd like that. And one has to be careful about that, Michael, that it has to be combined with what it looks like and all that. But burning desire, you're using your word, that to me is magic. And soul of fire is definitely more akin to magic. And we're not talking, we're talking about things that make a difference. I think that's what we're saying here. Okay, great.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, again, thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you, Bob Mueller, for being with us tonight. Again, we're talking to a person whose mentors Currently, over 30 executives, CEOs, presidents, founders, professors, nonprofits, for profits, academic institutions. So, a man who's at the top of his game and who has the humility and the generosity to be with us tonight. So, thank you so much, Bob, for your contribution to the alchemy of success. And we'll see you all again next week, same time, 7 p.m. Tuesday evenings. I'll be here. I'm Dr. Michael Leslie, and thank you for coming. Good night.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome, Bob.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching the Alchemy of Success podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.